Thank you. Welcome back to part 2. I'm Sarah Hudston. Like Anna, I'm also a member of the Bridport XR group, which I joined just about Christmas last year. I joined because... Why did I join? I joined because I had reached a point almost of complete despair about the damage we're doing, particularly to other forms of life on this planet. I'm a writer. I write the Guardian's Country Diary column once a month. So for me, I was particularly coming at it from an ecological perspective. And I was very aware that there's been more than 30 years of campaigns, all sorts of things have been tried, and yet governments just don't seem to listen. And what I like about Extinction Rebellion, and what I'm going to talk to you about now, is the clarity of the demands of the organisation and the reality of the strategies that it uses. This piece of graffiti went up in London towards the end of the London actions in April this year. This is the big rebellion for 10 days, which got all the media attention. And to some extent, I won't say it brought the government to the table to talk about what they need to do, but it at least got Parliament to begin to listen to what we need to do now. And we do have, I think we do have a moral obligation to act. Why should we care? Why should we care? It's not just the scientific reasons, it's also the moral obligations. And what are they? It's to other beings as well as humans, more than humans. It's because so far we've seen a situation where it's been the wealthy inflicting, by and large, suffering caused by climate chaos on the less wealthy. People are experiencing the worst effects so far are primarily in non-industrialised countries. That's set to continue. We have inherited a rich and wonderful world, and we are handing on a damaged and depleted world to our successors, to our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. Simple justice, I suggest, tells us that this is not right, morally speaking. We need to step up to our obligations and honour those responsibilities. And I think you can sum it up, really, in this one statement. This is a beautiful planet full of life, maybe the only one. It's certainly the only one of its kind that we know of. And to destroy it is nothing more than a terrible act of vandalism. I think we'd agree. How can we not act? What have we tried to do already? I said there's been more than 30 years of action on this. You've heard from Anna. You've heard about the global climate summits. There's been Rio and Kyoto and Paris. Locally and in the UK, numerous things have been tried. Greenpeace has been very active. Friends of the Earth have been very active. All those actions and efforts have been incredibly laudable. There's been a lot of emphasis on individual action. We're told to recycle more. We're told that if we use our cars less, that will be better. Yes, any contribution is good, but actually shifting the responsibility for where we are now onto individuals misses the point. Nothing that we can do, this is why it's so terrifying, nothing that we can do as individuals is going to solve the size of the problem that we are now facing. And in fact, in a slightly odd way, it's almost counterproductive to say to individuals, if you can recycle a bit more, it will be fine. Because people will, most of us are moral beings. We have values that we like to abide by. We will go and recycle a bit more. We'll spend the extra 5 minutes sorting out the papers from the plastic bottles. And then we think that's enough. That's the problem with it. The government has made us feel that we're doing our bit and that's okay and everything will be all right. And that feeling that everything will be all right means that everything can carry on in the way that we're used to. Because nobody's panicking, nobody's really asking for big changes, we're doing what we can, it will be all right. Because this is the world as we know it. The world as we know it is going to change massively. It's changing massively already, as you know. You knew probably before you came to this meeting, and you know in greater detail because of what Anna has said to you earlier. What's the government's response been to this last 30 years of research, scientific papers and campaigns by various ecological groups? Well, only recently it scrapped the renewable energy schemes. It's voted for the expansion of Heathrow Airport. It's given the go-ahead for fracking in communities who were dead against it. And, okay, they said they'll ban the sale of fossil fuel cars, but not until 2040. So none of these actions have worked. We look at this graph here, and there's a date on here. There's the first blue line is when the industrial age began in 1800. The second blue line that comes right at the end is when the IPCC was founded. And the red line that's jumping along the bottom and then suddenly shoots up at the end, that is the carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. The parts per million in our atmosphere. And you can see it bumps along and then it shoots upward. And the point at which the IPCC was founded, the body that was supposed to internationally pull people together to sort this out, has had no effect on that line. The line shoots up, in fact, even faster. It certainly doesn't plateau, and there's no suggestion that it's going to start dropping. Why hasn't it worked? Well, we do know the answers to this, and the hard answer is it hasn't worked because of the fundamental structural problems about the way that we run our society and we take decisions. And it's us, because we are citizens, we are this society. Big problem is the short-termism of democracy as it has become at the moment. Now, you all understand what this means. You know what I mean. The parties who get voted in win by concentrating on short-term bribes to small, very targeted sections of the population so that they can win target seats, and that stacks up into having some kind of, I hesitate in the current situation to use the word majority, but some kind of, let's just say, a number of MPs who through will alone perhaps might come and run our parliament for us and say then that they are speaking for us. They're speaking, in fact, for a very small minority of the people in this country, whatever their views are. There's also the problem, capitalism has an endemic failure to cost the future. Now, this is not about saying that capitalism is an entirely bad thing. Capitalism has allowed us to achieve enormous amounts. It enables hundreds of thousands of people who don't know each other to work together in some kind of system and to exchange things and to get things done. The problem was where we are now with this late hyper-capitalism, if you like, that we have in the West, is that companies are forced to take very, very short-term decisions because they're owned by shareholders, and the shareholders all the time want a quick return on their money so they can then invest it into another company and get a quick return on their money. Any company that starts to take even fairly medium-term decisions for the better, let alone long-term planning decisions, will be eaten and gobbled up by its competitors. It's just the way markets are working at the moment in our part of the world. And I think as individuals, I certainly feel really trapped by this. I think we all do, by the notion that we all know that unless we work together, substantially work together, action seems pointless. What can we do? We're back to the recycling problem. You know, the hard fact that it's morally right to try and recycle and do all these things and to look at your own life. But if only you're doing that, and millions of other people aren't, and certainly governments aren't, the governments who implement the structures that define our lives and define our choices, then what difference would it make? We're back with the dilemma, what I call the going on the aeroplane dilemma, which is the plane is going there anyway. What difference does it make if I sit in that seat on it? So, we need a new approach. Couldn't do a presentation, could I, without showing you a picture at some point of Greta. Greta, interestingly enough, the Swedish pronunciation of her surname. Does anybody know how the Swedish pronunciation of her surname goes? No, her surname, her second name. Well, the nearest I've heard it pronounced is, it sounds like turn by. And the last thing she does, it's slightly ironic because that's the last thing that she does. She has said very clearly, I think one thing she's very, very good at is just coming out with statements that sum up a lot of the confusion, a lot of the fear that's around things. And as she says, there's no rules for keeping fossil fuel in the ground. We need to go out now and break the rules. We need to break the rules that perhaps were okay for a while, but are now failing us. There's a clue in the name of Extinction Rebellion. It's a rebellion. It's about breaking the rules. It's about flouting the rules. It's not about anarchy and breaking any and every rule. It's about thinking very carefully about what is failing us, calling for that change, and to call for that change, we have to go out there and we have to get attention. We must be disruptive and we have to break some rules. And in doing so, we are following a strategy of civil resistance, a strategy which Extinction Rebellion likes to call non-violent direct action because it sums up all the elements of this. It's non-violent, it's direct action by citizens. And it's a strategy that, of course, has famously been used to great success in history in the past. It was used, of course, by Gandhi in India against the British occupation. It was used, there's Rosa Parks, who stood up on a bus in the southern states of America. She refused to give her seat up to a white person, and that triggered the whole American civil rights movement. And then Martin Luther King, who came on and led that movement. Now, the interesting thing about all these three people is in their time when they were taking these actions and they were fighting for their causes, they were regarded a lot of the time with contempt. They were seen as troublemakers. They weren't at all given the kind of respectful views that they're seen with now. Well, you have to remember that people, when you take a stand, you're likely to be vilified for law-breaking and disruptiveness. So what are the elements of civil resistance as they apply to Extinction Rebellion? I'll say it again, it's non-violent. The reason it's non-violent is the moral reason. Of course, it's non-violent. If we are fighting for life on Earth, which is what we're doing, how can we go out there and be aggressive and destroy life? It would be a complete contradiction. Also, it's non-violent because research, if you look back over the history of civil protests, the protests who have used non-violent methods have been more successful than the protests who have used violent methods. So there's a utilitarian reason for using it as well. It needs a lot of people. We need a lot of people to join in. There's no particular magic number about the number of people to join in. It's probably lower than we might think it needs to be, but we need thousands of people to do this because we need to put pressure on the government, which is why, again, we need to focus on the capital city, in our case London, where the power is, because what we're looking for, what we're fighting for, is change at a big governmental level. It's not about us agreeing to do more of the recycling. It's about fundamental change and emergency action in the situation that we are in now. We need to be disruptive. We need to break the law to get attention. If we go out and stand in shopping centres and hand out leaflets to people and ask them to sign petitions, quite a lot of them will run, will scuttle past and go like this, because who likes being handed a leaflet at a shopping centre and pestered to sign a petition? And also, nobody will really take it seriously, because if there was an emergency going on, if there was a threat to life on this planet, surely people would be doing a bit more than standing in a shopping centre handing out leaflets. So we need to be disruptive. We need to break the law to get attention. We need to break the law very selectively and tactically and knowing what we're doing, but we have to do that. It's hard enough to get the media to cover a protest march that's just a simple protest march. It's hard enough to get the politicians to listen to what people are saying. You go on a protest march for one day, and even if you manage to get all the media coverage you might want for it, the politicians are likely to think, the decision makers and the authorities are likely to think, okay, they've done their protest now, they've had their say, they're going to go away. That was it. We're not going to go away. It's absolutely important we keep going with this, which is why we say it has to be prolonged. And it does need to inflict economic damage. You need to inflict economic damage in some form or another, because, like it or not, that is how our society is run, and that is the touch point, that is the pressure point. And then finally, it's got to be fun, because if you get involved in Extinction Rebellion, if you let it, it will eat your life. It's just, there's no end to what it will ask you to do. So why would you want to put all this energy into something if you're just putting your energy into it because you're driven by a sense of gloom and you're driven by a sense of doom and all the rest of it? Then you're going to burn yourself out. Fun, humour, it's an essential part of human life and human character. Has anybody here been to an XR action anywhere? Local or national, big or small? Put your hands up if you've been. Okay, people been. You will know actually what it's like, and one of the most striking things about those actions is the fun and the joy and the sense of hope, and that we can all feel good by getting together in a group and doing something. Just a few facts about Extinction Rebellion. It was formed last year, part of the social change movement of Rising Up. There's a declaration of rebellion when it first came to notice, October last year. Then London Bridge's blockade propelled it into public awareness, and of course we had the big rebellion weeks in London earlier this year. It's grown rapidly since. There's a map from the website that shows all the groups, very, very thickly clustered around Britain and Europe, and then spread out across the world as well. Some of the achievements. I think one of the biggest achievements has been that there's been hundreds of local groups have started, this one among them. Just since over the last few months when me and Anna have been going around and we've been doing this talk in Dorset, lots of groups have sprung up in Dorset who have been very active all over the place. I was talking about the number of people we need to get involved in this. And those local groups, you people in this room here now, from Seaton, from East Devon, from the edges of West Dorset, wherever you come from, you are those people. It's not going to be somebody else, it's going to be us here. I said that one of the things that attracted me to Extinction Rebellion was the simplicity of what it was wanting to do. And it's the three demands. So what does Extinction Rebellion want? What are they really there for? What are they about? Well, there are three very clear demands. Number one, tell the truth about the ecological crisis and declare a climate emergency. You need to tell the truth. Climate chaos is not a matter of belief. You don't believe in climate change. You understand the science. There is no debate about this among, scientists are unanimous that climate change is happening, it's happening fast, and it needs to be stopped. So we ask for the media to stop the false balance that we have seen when, for example, the BBC will have a scientist on, a reputable, internationally known scientist who talks about their research and talks about what we're facing in terms of the ecological crisis, the climate emergency, and then they have a so-called climate change skeptic who talks. it's irrelevant, because this is not a debate that's actually happening. That's not about neutrality. That's about letting people still, if they want, believe, as we come back to the word believe again, that this is not a matter of scientific consensus, which it is. We need to act now. So we want to halt greenhouse gas and to get down to net zero and halting the biodiversity loss by 2025. If we zero our emissions, even if we went down to zero on our greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, and we have at present 415 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we're supposed, in the sense that it'd be much better if we had 280 parts per million. So even if we stopped, our emissions are going to continue warming for some unforeseeable time into the future, until that excess carbon dioxide that's already out there is retaken back up again. So we need to stop immediately. 2025 really is proxy for immediately. We have to do it now. And this is beyond politics. This is not about whether you're left wing or you're right wing or what party you follow. This is about us as citizens, and it's about strengthening democracy. So we demand a citizens' assembly, and these will be the people. They will be ordinary people drawn from across the spectrum who will decide what this means, how it will change our lives. Why 2025? Well, I've said to you already that effectively it's proxy for now. And this graph, probably very difficult to see, particularly people sitting back at the room, is just a graph which shows those figures that I've just given you. Emissions are skyrocketing. So you can think of it this way. It's the car and the cliff. We're in a car, we're speeding towards the edge of the cliff. We know there's a cliff there. We know we're going to die if we're going to go off the end of the cliff. Despite this picture, this is no Thelma and Louise moment when we hurl off into some kind of bliss. This is disaster. Shall we just carry on at high speed going towards the cliff now, because we know that we've got, I don't know, half a mile, quarter of a mile, 50 yards, whatever it is, until we get the cliff. We'll wait till we get a bit nearer to put the brakes on, shall we? I think if we did that, we would really be trusting those brakes and thinking they were really good, and we'd be thinking that the cliff wasn't suddenly going to crumble and come a lot nearer to us than we thought it would be. No, we bloody well slam the brakes on now, wouldn't we? We're approaching the edge. Okay, 2050 is too late. We need to act now. So when you hear that date and people say, well, you know, it'll be all right, it won't be all right. Now, why is our third demand for a citizens' assembly? What is it about citizens' assembly that we're so hung up on about? This is a quote from the Parliament website. So this is British Parliament's own official website. And you can go away and you look it up, explaining what a citizens' assembly is. A citizens' assembly is a group of people who are brought together to discuss an issue or issues and reach a conclusion about what they think should happen. The people who take part are chosen so they reflect the wider population in terms of demographics, e.g. age, gender, ethnicity, social class, and sometimes relevant attitudes, e.g. preference for a small or a large state. So you take a number of people, good number of people, you make them as representative as possible. And this is how it works. So you randomly select your large group of citizens. They hear from experts and stakeholders, and they can invite their own experts in, so they're not just confined to the ones that perhaps the government says they should listen to. They read submissions from the public, so the public have a chance to have their say as well, even though they're not sitting on the assembly. They're then facilitated to talk about this in small groups over a number of months, the issues that come up, the feedback that's come in from the public. And then they draft and vote on a recommendation which they hand back to the government. And it's the government's job to review that recommendation and to implement it. Sounds a little bit utopian, doesn't it? As if it could never happen. Well, it's not something that's been dreamed up by XR. It's been used, most recently it was used in Ireland to tackle the very difficult long-running problem of liberalising or not the abortion laws. They actually used a full citizens' assembly, and it was very successful there because it cut across an issue that just none of the politicians personally could be seen to touch, because it would affect, it was the short-termism thing again. It was considered too hot and too political for the politicians, so they handed it back to the people. And that's quite a good illustration of why we want a citizens' assembly, because it can take the long view rather than the short view. It's free from corporate influences because you're not going to be lobbied by the groups that pay millions of pounds to lobby MPs. It's truly representative of all the population. It's not just the green eco freaks telling everybody what to do, because that would never be successful. It's trusted by the public for that reason. And it has been effective before. I've mentioned Ireland. It's also used in Poland quite recently to tackle problems of flooding and what to do about it in the city of Gdansk. So what are the practicalities? How do we work? I'll say it again, we are non-violent. It's a quote here from John Lennon, who said, "When it gets down to having to use violence, then you are playing the system's game. Because once they've got you violent, then they know how to handle you. The only thing they don't know how to handle is non-violence and humour." We are decentralised. Anyone can act in the name of Extinction Rebellion. You don't need permission to do that, as long as you are supporting the 3 demands and you sign up to the 10 principles which are on the website. And the 10 principles are to do, as you would expect, with equality and fairness, and again, non-violence. We have a network of local groups, and there isn't, contrary to what anyone might read in the press or say about us, we don't have a Mr. Big, there isn't a central pot of funding, nobody tells us what to do and then we follow it. We don't have a leader. Roger Hallam is a very well-known figurehead, he was one of the founders, so is Gail Bradbrook. But they don't tell the rest of us what to do. They are just people who have a certain profile. Here in Seaton, you can decide whether what they would like you to do or what they suggest is whether you want to do or not. You would come up with your own ideas about what is relevant here. Our core activities are actions. By actions, we're back again to the non-violent direct action. We're particularly good, for example, at holding spaces. So in the London Rebellion in April, there were 4 spaces in central London which were occupied, and I say held, by Extinction Rebellion. Most famously for the Southwest groups, it was Waterloo Bridge. Groups moved onto the bridge, they moved plants and trees, they had a stage, and it was closed to traffic. There were some rebels, some actually from the Bridport group, who locked or glued themselves on the underneath of a lorry to help stop that being moved. And over those 10 days, that group of people on the bridge created a little, or even a big, I think, in lots of respects, a society that was working among them. It was an incredible moment of solidarity. And the same thing happened in Oxford Circus, where they had the famous pink boat, very iconic. Happened at Marble Arch, where lots of people were camping. And it happened in a perhaps more intellectualised way in Parliament Square. And there were lots of activities, many of them very visual. I don't know if you must have seen the Red Rebels, who are the groups who dress entirely in red, and they have the white faces, men and women, and they wear long robes, and they just move very slowly, and they don't say anything. I always find them visually very stunning. I think that was very successful action. So those are our core activities. Some actions are conceived and planned locally. Die-ins, for example. This is a picture of the die-in that they had in Yeovil. That's a bit of a standard thing to do. It can be very effective. There's a picture there from St Albans. They had banner hanging. Around here, more recently, the Weymouth and Dorchester group had a funeral march for fishes at the Seafood Festival on Weymouth Seafront. They all dressed in black and they had their banners and so forth. I thought that was very effective. And that was, again, highlighting the biodiversity issue. Rebellion days are another good thing. We had a rebellion day in Bridport back in the spring when we had a whole lot of things going on in Buckydew Square, and then we had a protest march down South Street, which is the main street in Bridport. We had a samba band and the traffic stopped. And interesting, a lot of people joined that march who hadn't turned out for Extinction Rebellion but saw what we were doing and saw the banners and said, yeah, I support that. And they joined in. Some are conceived and planned nationally. Again, the April Rebellion. Our next big action, we're planning a whole big similar thing in London this October. And much of the actions that will be deployed then will be discussed, and there'll be lots of training groups over the next month through September. And there's a festival, 2-day festival in Bideford at the beginning of September called Rising Tide for rebels in the southwest, and it'll be lots of training workshops and speaker events and fun and music as well. It's quite interesting that public support has surged after these actions because, quite frankly, particularly the London actions, yeah, they did inconvenience people. They held up traffic, they blocked bridges. Some people got very frustrated about that. Some people got very angry about that. But interestingly, at the same time, many, not all, it's never going to be all, but many of the people who did get angry about it said, yeah, I'm really pissed off that I couldn't get where it was I wanted to go, but I do understand why it is necessary, because we need to hold the government to account. We need to, you know, it's necessary disruption. Arrestables are at the heart of our action. Arrestables are people, as it says, who get arrested or prepared to put themselves in the line of arrest. Now, you don't need to be an arrestable to get involved in Extinction Rebellion. I always say this at this point. I have not been arrested, and at the moment, I have got no plans to be arrested. For every person who's arrested, there's approximately 20 or 30 other people who have made that action and that arrest possible. There'll be support services. There are all sorts of things that go on. There's plenty of ways you can get involved without getting yourself arrested. You don't have to get arrested. There you are. There's the figure, 20 plus supportive others. But those people who are brave enough to put themselves in that position and are able to, let's be frank about it as well, because it's a practical decision. You know, it will have knock-on effects of, you know, other things in your life if you want to get yourself arrested. Those people who are brave enough, I think, you know, have my full support and praise. Now, who recognises this rebel being arrested? So at this point, it's really good, I think, because Anna can come and say a few words about being arrested and what it's like. Let me just pass that over to you. Pause while we swap the mics over. Just click that on there.
You could just hold that if you like.
Just hold it. There you go.
Okay, yes, The Guardian got this lovely, flattering picture of me being hauled away in the arms of 2 policemen. That's Tim and that's Emmett, my arresting officer. And yes, they managed to arrest me on Waterloo Bridge. So I was one of, I think, between 1,200 and 1,300 people who were arrested during the Extinction Rebellion actions at all the sites over the week or so, 10 days that it was happening. Waterloo Bridge was like the southwest site, if you like, and our affinity group at Bridport were on the bridge, and they kind of, well, a lot of them were there for the whole time, I think. One of them, Grace, was sort of chained on under a bus for some considerable time. But I managed to get arrested on lunchtime of the second day, so I wasn't there for quite that long. There was a point when we were on the bridge and we saw probably about 19, 20 police vans, you know, people carrying vans, all amassed under the bridge at the south end. And so we knew that they were going to take some action to come and try to clear the protest, to come and try to end the protest. And it was only the second day. And I had gone down to London with no intention of getting arrested at all. I wasn't sort of going down there sort of like thinking, yes, I'm arrestable, I'm dying to get arrested. I was quite equivocal about being arrested, actually. When I first heard about this in talks that I heard, I was a bit, I don't really think that that's for me. But there was just a kind of moment when I was on that bridge and the police were coming to try to put an end to the protest, and I felt that it was very important that the protest continued at that point. And I knew that what I wanted to do was to try to help hold the space. And so I went to the front, where there were lots of people sitting on the ground, and I sat among them. And as I went down to that position, of course I was going through thousands of people who were watering the trees, keeping the well-being tent going, looking after children, playing music, etc. So these were non-arrestable occupiers, and they were all fulfilling a really, really important role. So there I was, and they came and arrested me for willful obstruction of the highway and breach of Section 14 of the Public Order Act. And of course, many around me were passively resisting arrest by basically just making themselves heavy and just refusing to move and having to be sort of like carted off with a policeman on each corner. But I've got a bad back and a slightly absurd sense of my own dignity, so I decided that I was going to get up and walk. So went down to the van. A legal observer from our group was following, taking all the details. I was in the van with 3 other people and 6 policemen, so it's not very efficient. We had to have an arresting officer each, the driver and an extra policeman. I don't know what that was for. And they took us off to Bromley police station. So I was in custody, all told, for about 9 hours, but quite a lot of that was driving all the way to Bromley. So you arrive at the police station. What's it like being arrested? It's a little bit intimidating because you have to do those things like you see on the telly. You have to give your fingerprints and your DNA, and they go through all of your possessions and take them off you. And they say you can call one person. And so I had to talk to my daughter and tell her what I'd done, and she wasn't very impressed, I can tell you. And then they put you into a cell. This is where I have to say, really, that as Sarah was saying, it is a choice, and we are coming in this country from a position of privilege in choosing to be arrested. And not all of us can expect it to be quite so easy. There are people in other countries who would get shot in the street for doing what Extinction Rebellion did, or if they got arrested and put into jail, they could expect brutality and unfair treatment. And in fact, there are people in this country, if I'd been of a different ethnic group or had mental health issues, I might have had a much, much worse time. But as it was, I just settled into the cell. They let you take a book. It's clean, there's a loo, someone peeps in on you every so often to make sure you're all right. You can have water, hot drinks, food if you need it, blanket if you need it. So it's okay. It was quite boring, and it's a little anxious making because you're not quite sure what's going to happen or how long it's going to go on. But all in all, I have to say it is not the worst ordeal I've ever been through. I've had worse hospital appointments. In fact, I've had worse job interviews if it comes to that. But yes, eventually they kind of decided to release me. And there I was thinking, I'm in Bromley and it's 10 o'clock at night. I have absolutely no idea how I'm going to get back to where I needed to be. But outside the door, there were 4 lovely people from XR, arrestee support, and the legal observer who'd taken all the details, had kind of like distributed the information about where people had gone, and there they were with hot drinks and comforting words and ready to help me to get back to where I needed to be. And that's part of what this movement is about, looking after each other, well-being, regen. So I have in recent weeks been given my date for court So I go to court next week, and I'm not completely sort of sure what's going to happen yet. I've been anticipating this for some time because, of course, the Met had said they were going to send everybody to court. They were going to prosecute everybody who had been involved, which arguably, I mean, some people have said this is a massive waste of money and not in the public interest to just sort of like make people who are sitting in the road do this when there are people who've committed much worse offences who actually never kind of get to court. But nevertheless, that's where we are. It was quite amusing to get it and read my charge sheet in the end. I'd been kind of like sort of slightly anxious and sort of, is it going to happen? When's it going to happen? Dreading it a little bit, but there it was. There's just a kind of letter explaining what's going on. There's a statement of means. You have to kind of like say what you earn so they know how much to fine you. And then there's a very, very long handwritten, photocopied sort of like witness statement from Emmett there, sort of describing what happened with some quite amusing bits in about just seemed to sort of want to describe my clothes very thoroughly, and said I was wearing a yellow t-shirt with a bee emblem and also a sand timer emblem, by which I could tell that she was part of the demonstrations. And he also said, bless him, the female appeared to be in her late 40s. I'm 60 next February, so I knew I liked him. So there we are. I'll stand up in court and I will make a statement. And I'll be very, very proud to do so and to explain to the court and everybody present why I acted in the way I did and why I considered it to be extremely necessary. And as of course I do. And I'm one of very many, so I don't feel alone. Okay.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so why should you get involved? You people here, why should you get involved? Well, there's a list of points here. It's fun, as I've said. It's a chance to meet amazing people. Perhaps we are the only game in town for radically changing course. And we hope that we can succeed where other people have perhaps not had the same results. We know that we're building on their efforts, as I said, going back years and years and years, but nevertheless, there's some good theory here about the tactics, about the type of action to be taken. Inaction is morally indefensible. It means being on the right side of history. I think also it's about values. It's about your personal values. When you think about the sort of person that you are you the sort of person that just walks by? Or are you the sort of person that there's something in you, there's something in your life, you have a sense of the importance of life on this planet, the uniqueness of life on this planet and the value of that. And you might have that sense because you have a spiritual belief, a faith belief. You may not have anything of that sort at all. It doesn't matter. But there will be, if you sit quietly and you think to yourself, there will be, deep down, there will be a core in you there of that value. And it's for those reasons, I think, in the end of the day, that you might act. And what might you do? Well, you don't have to get arrested. Although, after hearing about it from Anna, how could you resist? You lose 10 years for a start, makes you 10 years younger. You can do a lot of other things away from the arrest line. Producing art is a huge thing to do. And quite a lot of people find that actually that creative side, that so-called playful side, is immensely rewarding. Attend actions, always attend actions if you can, because we need those numbers. Join, coordinate a working group, organise presenter talks, start a local group. There is a very active local group here already. be part of it if you're not already. The key thing is you don't need permission. You don't need to go through an initiation ceremony or somebody say, yes, you could be part of Extinction Rebellion. You can give yourself that permission because it is a non-hierarchical, decentralised organisation. You have the responsibility and the permission to act and to take action. There's quite a lot of things coming up locally. What we're going to do is I'll actually share a list of these again with the local group so that they can put it out on the Facebook page and whatever means they have to communicate with you if you've got a local email newsletter or whatever, because it's very hard to read on here. But we have got the situation over in Dorset with Dorset Council, the new Dorset Council. We are working with them and trying to push them on come up with an actual action plan to do something, having declared a climate emergency, and we're pressing for a citizens' assembly. There are Heading for Extinction talks, again like this one, coming up in Lyme Regis and Weymouth. There's a day of action in Weymouth on the 31st of August. If you've never been to something, an Extinction Rebellion event, that would be a good thing to go to. And then there's the Rising Tide Festival, which I mentioned, which is training and more for all South West activists, 6th to 8th September, near Bideford in Devon. Key thing about that is you can get there on the train and there will be coaches as part of the festival that will take you from the train station to Tapley Park, which is the location. So even if you can't get there, and of course it's always better, that individual action thing again, to drive as less as possible if you can and use public transport, that infrastructure has been set up for it. 21st of September in Bridport, we're having an action day on the Saturday, big up the bus station, because we want to particularly focus on the issue of rural transport, public transport, which has been massively cut back. School strikes for climate, 20th and 27th of September. Shaftesbury Group are doing a very interesting thing on 27th to 29th of September when they're doing a pilgrimage, and they'll go all the way down to Poole Harbour. And their aim is to draw attention to oil and hydrocarbon extraction in Dorset, particularly down that east side of Dorset. You can come for all of it or some of it, or just join them for a meal in the evening to show support. But I think that action, taking a bit of time over it, involving people from lots of different groups down an area, drawing people together, I think that's a very XR type of thing to be doing. Over in Bridport, so not very far from you here, we have an Extinction Cafe every third Saturday of the month, 10 to 12, just a drop in, you don't have to be there all the time. It's a very informal thing. It's at Beach and Barnicot Cafe in South Street. And then all this is building up to the Autumn Rebellion in London from the 7th of October for 2 weeks. The last thing I'm going to say is this book was published a couple of months ago by Extinction Rebellion. You might have seen it, you might have a copy, you might not. It's called This Is Not a Drill. It's an Extinction Rebellion handbook. It was published by Penguin Books, and I love the fact that they allowed their logo to be used in the correct position on the front, the dead penguin. It's a very eclectic mix, as you would expect, of writings and essays, short essays and sort of rantings and bits from people who've been involved in the movement so far. But right at the beginning is the Declaration of Rebellion, which is where it all started last October. And I'm not going to read the full Declaration of Rebellion, but I'm just going to read the final paragraph, because it's quite a good summary of what this is all about. We call upon every principled and peaceful citizen to rise with us. We demand to be heard, to apply informed solutions to these ecological crises, and to create a National Assembly by which to initiate those solutions needed to change our present cataclysmic course. And then, we refuse to bequeath a dying planet to future generations by failing to act now. We act in peace, with ferocious love of these lands in our hearts. We act on behalf of all life. Thank you very much.